welcome to another episode of Sum of Our Parts, the podcast where two friends talk about the movies that add up to make us who we are. I'm Lindsay,
And I'm Jim.
and this week Jim picked the movie. So, Jim, why don't you tell us what you had us watch?
Well, to honor the month and then the day coming up, I picked a movie that pertains to the time. It's Mississippi Burning with Gene Hackman and Willem Dafoe. Came out in 1988, but it's based on the story of the three civil rights workers that went missing in Mississippi in 1964 and the search and what happened and so on and so forth. So I thought it was a very good representation of the time, and I feel like the performances really told a lot about the mixed feelings at that time about things changing, hopefully for the better, and then some of the issues that had to be dealt with, and some of the things that are still dealt with, unfortunately.
Yeah, so this episode is coming out on Martin Luther King Day. There's also maybe something else happening that day. Whatever.
The day after we figure out who's going into the Super Bowl, or
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
to the
yeah.
AFC
To the
NFC
conference
Championship.
championships. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that's the big thing
Yeah,
happening.
yeah. Oh, and Lindsay and have a day off
Yeah.
for
That's
Martin
it.
Luther King Day.
Yes, of course. So that I think is part of the reason why you picked this, and I think this is the first time I watched this movie. Obviously it came out a little bit before I was born, but it's some of the sentiments, while not exactly the same, feel still kind of relevant, unfortunately.
I feel the same way, and this movie came to mind when we were talking about current events, and then again, the whole premise of our podcast is to bring out movies that made an impact on us, and to me, this made an impact. I remember when it came out. One, I was alive in 1964. I was 7 years old. Not that I was a big political activist, but I do remember things about that time with this issue going, the issue of segregation and racism and so on and so forth. And then I remember seeing this movie, and I remember, like I said, the biggest thing was that the performances by particularly by Willem Dafoe and Gene Hackman,
Mhm.
and then to a lesser extent Frances McDormand. I think probably
Mhm.
in one of her earlier roles, and
Mhm.
the a tidbit, the deputy that she is married to, Brad Dorff, is actually from West Virginia, from my home state. So
Mhm.
he's like one of our success stories, so to speak, that came out of the state, and a very good character actor. So,
Mhm.
and I
Mhm.
thought he did a good job in this. So,
Yeah.
and like you said, you had not seen the movie before, so your initial reaction, can I ask?
Yeah, I think it was a good movie. It's like heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we've talked a little bit about this in kind of starting this, but I read before I watched it that there was like criticism from the NAACP, like Coretta Scott King, Medgar Evers' widow, etc., about the movie. And I think that I think that that helped me go into it with certain expectations because I think
Mm-hmm.
that like certainly it's based around the murder of those three activists. I don't have their names off the top of my head, but that is like sort of just like in the movie, it's first of all, it's fictionalized because what actually happened is not what's portrayed
Right.
in the movie. But that's more of an inciting event, and it's really about kind of like the FBI like versus the establishment in the town, the Klan and the
Mm-hmm.
sheriff's office and the mayor and stuff. And so I think that if you have that like expectation, I think that, you know, I understand the criticism because
Mm-hmm.
also a lot the black characters are pretty side like stuff kind of happens to them. They're not really like a big part of the story. So I do understand the sort of like white savior kind of trope thing that people have a problem with. But I think there is a lot of interesting stuff to explore just in the sort of like law enforcement and like white establishment institutions, the tension of like addressing racism and civil rights. So I thought that it was really interesting in that portrayal because you can see like even in just between Willem Dafoe and Gene Hackman's characters, there is a very different perspective of how to
Correct.
handle things, right?
I
There is
agree.
the sort of like by the book, like Willem Dafoe's like obviously higher ranking in the FBI. He's very by the book, follow procedure, but he's also just like, well, obviously this is wrong. And like everybody knows this is wrong. So like, let's just approach it that way. And Gene Hackman is like, has less orthodox methods, which we'll get into. But he's from Mississippi also. And he's like, I know how these people are. And like, we can know that this is wrong, but also like, if we kind of go in like that, we're not going to get anywhere.
Mhm.
So we have to sort of like play their game, kind of, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like he's been there. He said he was a sheriff in a small Mississippi town, so that was
yeah.
his background before coming, I guess, to the FBI. So,
Yeah, and he tells a story that we'll get into too, where he's like, my dad was like one of these people. Like my
mm,
dad was one of these racist white people who like just could not see a black man have something that he didn't. So he comes at it, even though he doesn't agree. He's not supportive of the Klan, but he like knows it much better than Willem Dafoe
mhm.
does. So he can kind of approach things at a different angle that is maybe a little bit more effective, if not legal.
Yeah, we won't. Yeah, we won't discuss whether or not we think it's ethical or legal or objectionable, but
Yeah, yeah. I
and
will say my ethics, I try to be a lady of principle, but I think my ethics get a little more blurry when we're taking down the Klan.
also, if you think about it, sometimes the old sayings, the ends justifies the means, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in this case, perhaps it does. Some people would argue that it's wrong regardless of what the means are or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. Um, in this particular movie, in this case, I hate, I'll admit it, I was rooting for Gene Hackman.
Oh, for sure, for
You
sure.
know, you
And
know,
because I think too that like I think the reason why for me it didn't feel as bad in this movie is because it's like the people with the power too. Like they they tried by the book,
right.
right? They
Hmm.
got people arrested, taken to court, and the state court, the judge says, well, obviously the issue is these outside people trying to do their coming into our town and do their civil rights nonsense. So I get it. And you, all of your sentence is suspended. You're free. Right?
Hmm.
So it's like, okay, well, we have to go a different way. So they did try because the unfortunately, like the issue they were trying to take on was entrenched in all the power structure in the town, right? It's the sheriff and the deputy and the mayor and the judges, like so there was like nowhere to go.
Exactly. And I
Um,
guess even up to the state police level, because they said,
yeah.
we had they couldn't get anything done at the state level. It had to go to
Yeah.
federal.
Yes. Yeah, so they had to file like civil rights charges and stuff against people and it was interesting too just to see because so much of the like weapon of those people was fear
Oh,
and to
yeah.
sort of like see them turn that around, right? For Gene Hackman to like put some fear in those people was really interesting. It was satisfying to see those people being fearful and like running and trying to flee in the night and stuff when that's what they were making all the black folks in their town do all the time.
Right. Yeah, they were getting a taste of their own medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and then you see everybody reacts the same to that. Everyone's then is afraid. It's
Yeah.
no one's different as far as that goes. If you threaten someone with violence or destruction or death or whatever it may be, or even something worse than death in a couple of
Mm-hmm.
cases in the movie, at
Mm-hmm.
least to a guy. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, they're straight up trying to torture people.
exactly. So, but everybody has that reaction, regardless of what race they are. You feel, you're afraid for your life, or you're afraid for, your safety and your well-being. And
Yeah.
so,
It's yeah. And it's just like hard for me to wrap my brain around, you know? Like
Yeah,
the
I'm
just the
sure
like hatred, and like obviously like I know that this happened. And it still happens, right?
it's
I walk
still,
around looking the way I do, and people are the way they are, and I experience bits of things, but just like understanding like how someone could feel that way. And I know they talk about in the movie it's like taught, but it's just like why? You know what I mean? It's like
no, it's, yeah,
I can, if I like disconnect from myself and put on like sociology brain, like I can get it, right? People are, when people feel like they don't have what they need, they turn their those feelings toward somebody else, and that makes them feel better, right? Like in the founding of our country, that was a purposeful thing, right? Because white landowners who owned slaves, there were a lot of poor white people who didn't own slaves, and they had more in common with enslaved people
mhm.
than the rich plantation owners, right? But the rich plantation owners knew that if all those white people and all those enslaved people got together, then they were in trouble. So they had to, they had to create racial solidarity instead of class solidarity, basically, right? So they're like, hey, you're better. Like people need somebody to be like better than. So like you're better than, you're like us. You're better than those people. And like that just like people hung on to that
You know, you're
forever.
exactly right. And I say, as growing up in West Virginia, which is, a small state and racially segregated. I grew up in the late 50s, 60s. We had families who were, yeah, poor,
Mhm.
but white. And then so subsequently, some of that was, sort of, taught, well, at least you're not this, you're not black,
Mhm.
or you don't live in that section of town, you live in this section of town. So,
Yeah.
um,
It's so interesting. It's just like what, there's just such like, I don't know. Like insecurity sounds like a small word, but it's like that, but really blown up. Because it's like you can't just be like, oh,
if I
y-
don't have this, I'll just work
you have to
harder.
have something. Yeah, you have to have something over somebody. Like who
Who
cares?
cares? Right, exactly. But if you think, maybe, our whole society is built on, how much can you do, or how much can you have, or how much can you get,
Hmm.
if I can be at this level of success, then I'm better than this
Yeah,
level,
yeah,
or whatever it may be. And hopefully some of us, as we move through life, we either become a little bit more enlightened, or a little bit more um, educated, and realize that that's really not what matters. I know
yeah.
there's going to be people, I'm sure, that at this point will probably turn this podcast off. Uh,
And bye.
yeah, yeah, and that's fine. But you know, Lindsay and I have a wide range in our ages, and I'm not trying to say that I'm smarter than Lindsay in any way, but I've just lived a lot longer. But as I got older, I realized that those things don't matter as much.
Yeah. And it's something that I still think about a lot today. Like I think now there's a lot of pushback to any discussion about like privilege and like critical race theory or like woke or whatever, but like it just is the truth. Like it just is the truth. And I like, why is that like threatening? Like it just is the truth. For example, here's one very small example. The GI Bill after World War II that
Mm,
helped veterans get homes,
mhm.
not open to black people.
Yep.
So homes that allow people to build wealth to be handed down throughout generations, black people didn't get that, right? So that puts white folks on first base, second base, and black folks are still on home plate, right? They
Mhm.
haven't even gotten
There's
to
a
run yet.
Yeah, there's a disparity.
It causes a disparity that still exists because that wasn't that long ago,
Oh yeah.
right? So that's only like a couple generations. So white people in and that's just one example of one law. So like white people have had a leg up in various very concrete things, and that it shouldn't be threatening to recognize that. No one is saying that like you didn't work hard or you don't deserve what you have. Just recognizing that like, you had a bit of a head start. Like,
Hmm.
but I think that some people are still very invested in the idea that if white people have more things than black people or people of other races, it's because they deserve it or because those other people did something wrong.
Hmm.
And that's just not like just on paper is not true. And so obviously like everybody is different, right? There are some people that have made bad decisions and some people that haven't, whatever. But like just as globally, like there are statistics, there are just like literal laws that were written that said this is for you and not for you. So to say
Right.
that like that doesn't exist is just fake. It's just fake news. It's a lie. And if you're so threatened by hearing that, like I think that's something you have to like look inward about. You know what I mean? Like do some reflection on like why is that so threatening
Hmm.
to hear that? Because if you are a person who knows you worked hard and you're secure in that, then like okay, you're good.
Hmm.
And it doesn't hurt to recognize that everybody has not been given the same opportunities. Like that is just the truth. And if you want the United States and like the American dream, and if you work hard, you get ahead, then you should want that to be like it's important to recognize that because that's something for us to like fix and do better about. But I just think and the stuff with like when people talk about affirmative action and they're like, well, you should hire the most qualified person, and usually people who say that, they never think like if a woman or a person of color gets qualified, they're like, well, they should have hired the most qualified person. It's like, so then you're saying that you don't think that like women and people of color can be the most qualified? Like you think that like a white man is the default most qualified person? And anybody else is automatically affirmative act. They're not qualified at all because they can't be. Like,
Right.
even if you're not saying that, like, that's like what it sounds like you're saying. So it's like,
It's implied.
yeah. So, like, if you follow the logic of what you're saying, that's the conclusion that you get to. So, like, to some extent, I do wish people would just say that. I think that's maybe the difference between what we see in this movie and some people now who maybe have these same beliefs. Now they know better than to
To say it out loud.
say it
Exactly. Yeah.
explicitly,
Exactly. Yeah.
but they don't think much different. And to some extent, it's good, I guess, that people are not saying. Obviously, I'm glad that we're not hearing the N word dropped all the time. But also, like, I do wish some people would just, if this is what you feel, then I think I would rather know up front. Like, just be explicit then. Just say it and then we can go from there. But people know well enough to know that like this is not socially acceptable now. So they have to sort of weasel around it with their words, I
And
guess.
yeah, and whatever their ideology or their their presentation. So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Call it something different.
Right.
We're
So
not gonna, we're not burning crosses and wearing white hoods and stuff. Even the Klan, which like still exists, even they're not doing the same.
no, no, it's
They don't have the same
it's
look.
no, not at all. Although
They,
there are, I guess, there's some small subsections, that still
yeah.
perhaps, in some parts of the world that still operate that way. Yeah, but for the most part, they've had to adapt and
Yeah. They're not
so
necessarily like the sheriff of the town anymore.
right, or even a prominent citizen anymore.
Yeah.
And it may very well be that it's not the dominating class, as far as like
Hmm.
in politics or government or whatever. It could be very well the opposite way. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
the people now who maybe don't have as much or don't have as much say so in the running of the local governments and so on, and maybe they
Hmm.
feel that they're victims.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. the victim thing. I think that is like really that came through in this movie, and that's very much still a thing. Like, I mean, that's sort of like Donald Trump's whole thing. Like, sir, you're rich. You're fine.
Mhm. So,
But everybody's coming after you. But well, let's talk about the movie a little bit. Mississippi Burning, 1988, directed by Alan Parker, who's actually a British guy. I'm always interested when people who are not American do movies about like race in America. It's always interesting to see their perspective. Um, Alan Parker has also directed Bugsy Malone, Fame, Pink Floyd's The Wall, Midnight Express, Angela's Ashes, The Life of David Gale. It was written by Chris Girolamo, who also wrote a movie that I guess was less successful called Miles from Home. And he wrote a bunch of like TV movies that I
okay.
hadn't really heard of. So, but it has a bunch of prominent people. We can kind of talk about them as we go through.
As we meet the characters.
Yeah. So, as Jim said, it takes place in 1964. The first shot we get is of a white and a colored water fountain just to kind of set us where we are. And we see people use the water fountains and
Mm.
Jim, I think you made an observation about them, that they're separate water fountains, but the water's coming from the same pipe.
Yeah, it's the same source, and it just divides into, one side is white and the other side says colored.
Yeah.
Um,
It's and then the next shot is a burning building.
mhm.
So it's a burning church, I guess. And we get kind of a spiritual is playing in the
I
background.
because I couldn't figure out at first whether it was a home or it was a church.
Yeah, I think it was a church because it was kind of
It,
a bigger.
yeah,
It
because
was the church that they were supposed
that
to
they were
go
supposed to
do. Um,
register the voters.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yes. I will say this did win uh the Oscar for best cinematography. So like visually, like the shots are very striking, I think.
And it was nominated. If you speaking, it's nominated for best motion picture, right?
Yes, it was nominated for 7 Oscars. But anyways, the next shot we see is a car driving with 2 white guys and a black guy, and these are representing the real people are Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner were the two white
Hmm.
guys and 1 black guy civil rights activists that were coming to register people to vote in Mississippi. The town also where this takes place is fake. It takes place in like Jessup County, Mississippi, which is not a real place.
Not a real place. So
So the real place that this murder took place was Philadelphia, Mississippi, but they made up this fake Jessup County, Mississippi for this movie. I think partially to show that like while this is based in real events, this is not like a bio. It's not
documentary,
a
yeah,
biopic or something.
right,
It's a drama.
yeah.
Although I think that they took from like the FBI files and transcripts and stuff for their like dialogue and stuff like that. So it is really about like the FBI perspective of these events. Anyway, the car's driving with these 3 guys. They're not even named in this movie. Actually,
No,
they don't even get
no,
names.
no.
But then there's a car coming up behind them, real close, and then another one, and then a police
Mm.
car, and there's this sort of like scary, ominous music.
Well, and the cars, the fellas that are driving, the civil rights workers are driving, they're driving like a station wagon with headlights and stuff, but the
Hmm.
other cars don't have their headlights on,
Yeah.
and and they're kind of bunched together, following
Hmm.
following the
And
other.
they're like getting real close to them,
Hmm.
and I don't even remember what the music sounded like, but it's just like,
It,
and then it's like a snare drum, like,
yeah,
mm, so it's like it's a sort of sparse soundtrack. It reminded me of like the Jaws music, where it's like very like immediately you're like, ooh, this is not
not
good.
good.
But
Yeah,
it's not like a lot of music, but it's like enough that it's like
yeah.
the tension is
Hmm.
there. So then it's, they're like hitting them. They're like, oh, these guys want to pass us. They won't pass them. They're bumper tapping them. Then one of them's a cop car and turns its light on. So they pull over and all the cars pull over. and they pull up to them. It's all these guys with flashlights, and the driver's like, "Hey man, whatever," and he's like, "Don't call me man." And
Mhm.
they're calling the white guys, they're Jewish, they're calling them Jew boy and N-word lovers. And the guy pulls out a gun and just shoots the driver in the head,
Yeah, just
just like
bingo.
point blank, like
Uh,
kind of
no,
pretty
like,
quickly.
yeah, there's no like build up really to it. It's just like boom. And
And you
then,
hear, we don't see the other guys get shot, but you hear like dialogue of them like talking about killing an N-word and like
hmm,
whatever.
well, at
And
least I got to shoot me,
mm-hmm,
you
mm-hmm.
know, yeah, it's,
So yeah, so we know from the beginning that these people are dead. And then the next thing we see is Gene Hackman and Willem Dafoe are in the car driving down, and Willem Dafoe's driving. Gene Hackman's looking through a file, and he's singing. There's all these pictures of the Klan, and there's like a Klan song with like sheet music, and he's singing it, and Willem Dafoe is not amused.
it, and it starts here, but all throughout the movie, they call each other by Mr. and their last
Yes,
names. It's
Mr.
never
Ward, Mr. Anderson.
Anderson. It's never by their first names,
No,
even
and
though
not even, they don't even say just like Ward and Anderson. It's like
we're,
Mr. They're very formal.
and they call all the other agents like that. It's always
Mhm.
by their, it's Mr., or whatever. So yeah,
It like almost makes me laugh a little bit. Like it feels a little comical
it
because they're like
does.
so like overly formal. We get the sense already that like, their style is different. So
Mhm.
Willem Dafoe, he's Mr. Ward, and he's younger, but he's higher up in the FBI. He's serious, he's by the book. Gene Hackman is Anderson. He's older and has kind of you get the sense of like a sort of book smarts versus street smarts kind of divide. Uh, he's joking and stuff, and
Yeah,
he's
Willem's not having much of that. He just and he says, he goes, "It's not that I don't like you. I just don't appreciate your sense of humor or share your
yeah.
sense of humor." So
Yes. I think he does eventually get him to like laugh at one thing. I can't remember exactly what it is. But yeah, and I think that they both sort of come to this with different experience too. Like Ward was present when they were helping James Meredith integrate Ole Miss
mhm.
just a few years before this. And obviously, as we talked about, Anderson is from Mississippi. He used to be a small town Mississippi sheriff. So, he knows what it's like there. So they both kind of have their experience in this area kind of from different angles. So they arrive in Jessup County, Mississippi, and go to the sheriff's office to meet with Sheriff, I can't remember.
Stucky.
Stuckey, of course.
Yeah.
Sheriff Stuck.
And we get
So
to meet Brad Dourif's character.
yes. Well, let's pause and talk. So Gene Hackman and Willem Dafoe, we've actually talked about on the podcast already. They've been in movies we've done. Gene Hackman was in The Replacements, but he has been in a bunch of other things. He was in The Replacements. That's where we talked about him here. Hoosiers, The French Connection, Unforgiven, The Royal Tenenbaums, Enemy of the State, The Birdcage,
Superman.
Superman, yes. Willem Dafoe, most recently in Nosferatu. He's been in the Spider-Man movies. He's in a lot of Robert Eggers, like The Lighthouse and The Northman and Nosferatu. He's been in a lot of Wes Anderson movies of
Mm.
late, and Yorgos Lanthimos, like Poor Things. He was in Streets of Fire. That's where we have talked about him here before. He was in the Aquaman movies for some reason. And then in this scene, we meet Brad Dourif, who plays Deputy Sheriff Pell, Clinton Pell.
Clint.
Uh, Brad Dourif, he, like Jim said, is a really good character actor. I think probably you've seen or heard his voice somewhere. He's the voice of Chucky in the Child's Play movies and all the spin-offs. So like Chucky, like the murderous doll, that is him. If you're a Lord of the Rings person, he is Grima Wormtongue, who was the like slimy guy talking to King Theoden and then goes and reports to Saruman. That's Grima Wormtongue. That is Brad Dourif. He was on a particularly gruesome episode of Criminal Minds where he was abducting people and turning them into marionettes.
Ooh,
Yeah, so he was like
ooh.
breaking their
Oh,
all their
really?
joints. Yeah, so he made them like into
Oh,
human marionettes. He was also in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and in
mm,
the Dune from 1984, directed by the late great David Lynch, who we just
R.I.P.
lost.
Yes.
So yeah, Brad Dourif. I'm sure you've probably seen him around or heard him. But he is the deputy sheriff, and we get a sense immediately that he's not super happy to see these people because he calls them the Federal Bureau of Integration.
With a smile on his face.
Yes, and he says the sheriff is busy. Ward is like, okay, we'll wait. And he sits down, and Anderson's like, you tell the sheriff to get his ass out here.
Yeah, or I'm going to kick that door in.
Yes. And suddenly,
Uh,
the sheriff's not busy.
and is this the most stereotypical depiction of a small town Southern sheriff that you, the only he's got the sunglasses hanging in his shirt pocket. The only thing he doesn't have is wearing them. But
Yeah.
he looks like Jackie Gleason in Smokey and the Bandit.
He's got a big old belly, and he's not super friendly. He thinks all of this. He doesn't think so. At this point, they're investigating that these civil rights workers are missing. We
Right.
know as the audience that they're dead, but as far as the FBI is concerned, they're missing. The sheriff is like, this is all a publicity stunt cooked up by that Martin Luther King, blah, blah, blah. The police say that they arrested the boys for speeding and then they let them go, or they were released and then they left. They said they followed them as far as the county line and then they drove away. And Ward is like, I don't believe that that is the case. Because these boys they're trained activists. So they are part of like, there were a lot of organizations at the time, NAACP, SNCC, like all of these
Right.
groups. Like this was, I think that's also sometimes something that people don't always know. Like they think that like Rosa Parks just like sat on the bus and wouldn't move. Like Rosa Parks was a trained activist, right? She knew what she was doing.
Yeah.
And so same with these guys, they would have checked in.
Right.
They would have made a phone call to the group they're working for, and they didn't. So Willem Dafoe's like, that's not what happened. He knows something in the milk ain't clean, as they
Oh,
say.
oh, oh, I like that. So
We're
yeah,
in
yeah.
Mississippi. I'm getting folksy.
I see that. Okay.
As we mentioned, Anderson was a Mississippi sheriff, so he's like Ward knows how like the civil rights movement works, and Anderson knows how Southern sheriffs work. So he's like, yeah, he also knows that that didn't happen, but just like in a different way. So they need to go get something to eat. They go to a diner, and there are no seats open in the white part of the diner. There are very clearly seats open in the back where the black people sit. And Ward's like, "Oh, let's just go sit over there." And Anderson's like, "No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't do that."
Yeah.
Ward does it anyway because he's like, "Oh, this is fine.
Hmm.
The law says it's integrated." And I think
Right.
Ward does not understand the difference between de facto and de jure segregation. De jure is illegal, de facto still very much happening. So he goes and sits in the quote unquote colored section. Again, this is just as a disclaimer, this is the vocabulary of the movie, not my vocabulary.
And the vocabulary of the times,
Yes,
unfortunately.
yes.
So
So
yeah, yeah.
if you hear me say that, it's because it's what's in the movie, it's what's
It,
on the
it
signs. This is not how I talk in real life. Um, so he goes and he tries to start asking questions. He sits next to a young black guy and tries to start asking questions. And that guy is like, I have nothing to say to you. And he
oh,
keeps trying. He's like,
he's petrified.
yes, he's clearly very scared. And then he immediately leaves.
Hmm.
Ward and Anderson are kind of trying to retrace the civil rights workers' steps. It's interesting. They always call them the
Yeah.
boys, because they were young.
Yeah.
Um,
They
and I think at one point, it's later in the movie, but Anderson says like, Yeah, they were civil rights workers, but to me they're boys. They're just like
Yeah,
young boys.
yeah, they're just kids. They're just
Yeah.
yeah. To him, it wasn't the fact that they were actually what they were doing is that they were young people who who got killed.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is where we learned that the church that burned, that was actually where those people were setting up
Hmm.
voter registration. They're kind of retracing their steps, and they're trying to figure out sort of how to approach this. Anderson is like, these people, especially the black folks here, are not going to talk to us because after we leave, they have to keep living here. And it's not going to like go well for them, which as we see is very accurate. And Ward is like, well, we're it's procedure. We got to ask people questions. Like that's procedure. So they talk to an old black couple. White men burned their church, attacked her husband, and she told the civil rights boys, but they won't tell them anything else.
Right. That they didn't recognize them. They didn't know who they were. And
Hmm.
my God, when you look around where the house that they're
Hmm.
in, and her husband who looks like I almost thought he was burned,
Hmm.
but he can't get out of bed. But the house is just awful. You can see
Hmm.
the conditions that they live in.
And all their houses are just like straight up wood. Like
Right?
they are
Yeah.
like wood shacks. So like very easy, very flammable.
Yeah, and probably, what we used to call tar paper roofs. There
Hmm.
wasn't shingles per se. It was just the tar paper that was put over it to sort of keep the wood from warping and stuff. But you couldn't afford shingles. And
Hmm.
ask me how I know that. Growing up in a small town in West Virginia, so
Yeah. But yeah, they won't talk to him. And then the next scene, this is the why, right? So the guy that Willem Dafoe tried to talk to at the diner, his name's Hollis. Some white guys come to this black family's house knocking on the door looking for Hollis, and they come in and chase him out. And then, we don't see him again till a few scenes later, but he wakes up and he's like in a cage.
it's like a chicken coop thing with
Yeah.
because it's full of feathers.
Yeah, he's like covered, he's all dirty.
Yeah,
And then later they have obviously like beat the shit out of him, and then
right.
they just shove him out of a car in the middle of town, like in front of the sheriff's department. He's alive, but not in good shape.
Not in good shape, and yeah, that's even because the FBI guys run out to try to help him, and
Hmm.
then and the locals or no, the sheriff, no, this is a local matter, we got this. And was it is it Lester, not Lester, Pale says something about, oh, it's a shame to have blood on our streets,
Hmm.
no matter whose blood it is,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah, it's like, yeah,
Hmm.
shade, throwing shade.
Yeah. So Ward and Anderson are kind of talking about things, and this is where we get a little bit more into like their backgrounds and their beliefs. So Ward, I think Anderson's like, do you admire like these boys,
Mhm.
the civil rights workers? And Ward is like, yeah, of course, like absolutely. And Anderson thinks they're being used, but Ward's like, they wanted to do this, like they
Uh-huh.
signed up for this, but Anderson's like, but they knew that they were gonna die, like they knew that there's a possibility of them dying,
Right.
and and Ward says there's some things that are worth dying for, and Anderson says, well, to people down here, there are some things that are worth killing for.
Excellent
And
point about, yeah, the two die opposing
dichotomy. Yeah.
dichotomy. Thank you.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
it's crazy. Like, again, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around. Like, obviously, like freedom and equality are worth dying for, but like hating black people is worth killing for. Like,
Well, look at the Civil War, and the all that
yeah.
precipitated that. And and there was always going to be the argument that, and I'm not an expert about, it wasn't about slavery, but
It's in the Confederate Constitution and in many articles of secession of multiple states. I'm just saying.
I know I'm trying to.
No, but there are people that say it's not.
That
But
still
like
argue that it wasn't about slavery.
there is
But yeah,
documentary evidence that the people who started it said it was.
so
But yeah, it's just like it's just hard for me to like identify. I can't imagine like ever feeling that way. So it's hard for me to like I
Mhm.
think I'm generally an empathetic person. I just like my empathy cannot extend to that, to like just absolute hatred.
Right,
Um and Willem Dafoe's doesn't either because he's like, where does this hatred come from?
right.
And Anderson talks about growing up and he's from Mississippi and down the street there was a black guy.
Monroe.
Monroe, yeah.
Yeah,
And he got a mule on his land. Everybody had like little farms, and he had a mule, and he was like doing really well. He could do a lot more of his farming. He was much more efficient now that he had a mule. And his dad was very upset.
yeah.
And the mule turned up dead. And Anderson knew that his dad did it. And his dad seemed like I forget what he said, but his dad didn't seem like proud of it.
Yeah,
But
he said he was ashamed of it,
yeah,
but he said, yeah, he said if you can't be,
if you ain't even better than an N word, son, then who are you better than?
yeah,
Which goes to what we were talking about before. You got to be better than some. Like w- you could just not be better than anybody. Like
right,
you could
yeah,
just live with it. Just live with yourself.
but yeah, that's maybe it's not in our nature. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know because it just makes me think like what is so this is like my like therapy brain maybe, but like what is so lacking in you that you have to be better than someone else?
Well,
I don't
yeah,
know. It's like I do
obviously
domestic
you're not an American. That's
I do domestic
that was a
violence.
joke, people.
Yes. I do domestic violence work and it's like the same question that I have. Like
I
what is
understand,
so lacking in you that you have to have like control and power over another person?
right? That you have to visit violence on someone else.
Yeah. And that's the way I feel about this too.
And I think you're, yeah, not that my opinion means anything, but I think you're dead on the money. So,
But anyways, Ward and Anderson, they're having their nice chat, and then something comes crashing through their window, and outside of their window is a cross on fire. So they have received their welcome from the local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan.
I couldn't tell if it was a gunshot that came through the window or did they throw a brick through the
I
window?
couldn't tell either because it was a big crash.
Yeah, like a big bang. And then I didn't
Yeah.
know if it was a gunshot or because I didn't see anything land in the room.
Yeah. But it was a
So,
big, like,
oh yeah,
it
and it
crashed out like
shattered
the
the
whole
window.
window. Yeah. So
Exactly.
it might have been a gunshot. But in any case, they Ward tries to chase after him, but they drove away too quickly. And he calls Washington for more agents, which Anderson warns against because he's like, this is now it's becoming like a war,
Mhm.
basically. And well, I think he actually says that later, and Ward says it already is.
Right, but he said he goes that's the last thing you really should do,
Yeah.
and he says, well, he goes, but I'm still going to do it. So
Hmm. Yeah. So they set up in an old theater.
by
Um,
God, he gets these agents because the next scene is
they
like these guys unpacking cars and bringing boxes and
hmm they see a gathering of some white guys in the town, and they realize this is the Klan. It's led by Clayton
okay,
Townley.
Townley.
Yes,
There's a name, Clayton Townley. So
yeah, Stephen Tobolowsky, he's another actor that's like a character actor. You've seen him in something. If
Groundhog Day.
he's in Groundhog Day, he's been lately he does more TV.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
I'd remember him as a guy that was always getting punched out by Bill Murray and ground, or not punched out, but was just annoying.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's in Groundhog Day, he's in the movie Wild Hogs, he's in Thelma and Louise, Single White Female on TV. Most recently he was on Nobody Wants This, but I remember him he was on Glee, he was on The Goldbergs, he was on One Day at a Time, the remake of One Day at a Time, the more recent one, not the original
oh, okay.
one.
Okay.
But yeah, I think nowadays he does a lot of TV work. But I think if you look at Stephen Tobolowsky, you have seen him in something.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
He's also been on Law and Order Special Victims Unit more than once. I can't tell you the exact episodes off the top of my head, but he's definitely been on there.
But if you give her a moment, folks.
If you give me a minute, I'll find it. Um, but yeah, so they realize that it's the Klan, and you can see again, like Ward has his guys run the license plate, and that's how they figure out that he's the Grand
He's the Grand Wizard.
Wizard. Yeah,
The-
they all have like weird. I didn't know there was a such thing as a Grand Cyclops of the Klan. They have all
It's
the.
the all-seeing eye.
Oh well, I don't.
And then there's dragons.
There's
and
the
then
yes, the
there's
Grand Wizard. I've heard Grand Wizard and Grand Dragon. I have never
yeah.
heard Grand Cyclops, but we hear that later. That's what Pell's job was in the Klan. Anderson just goes and like asks around. He goes to the beauty shop. He's just like he's just
Yeah.
asking around. That's how he gets the information. But
Well, he goes to the barber shop first.
yes,
Remember?
yes,
And
yes,
then
yes, and that's where the mayor
we meet the
is.
mayor.
Yes, the mayor is played by Arlie Ermy, who's another person that I think is in a lot of things. He was in Full Metal Jacket. He was in the Marines in real life, so he's very
Yeah,
very
yeah.
much that in a lot
Gunny.
of
He's Gunny.
yes. So he's the voice of the army men in Toy Story.
Right, yeah. Of the Green Army Men.
Yeah.
And
He's in Full Metal Jacket. He was in Seven. He also on Law and Order SVU. Serial rapist.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Gunny?
And murderer. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Damn.
He was a real bad one.
Was he?
He was one of the worst, yeah.
I could see that.
The mayor says they don't like outsiders and that they're black people. He doesn't say that. We're happy until the beatnik college kids came. And he says, I think those kids just left. They're gone.
Yeah. I think they're out joyriding or doing something somewhere and just having a laugh, you know.
Mm-hmm. And the sheriff starts talking about what happens when people get pushed too far. And the mayor's talking about how there's a white culture and there's a colored culture and it's different. And they're listening to a baseball game. And Anderson says this. He says this joke a couple of times. But baseball is the only game a black man can shake a stick at a white man and not cause a riot.
I love that joke.
Yes, although Jackie Robinson, there was some.
Yeah.
Y'all need to watch 42, but they get a lead on the boys' car from the some folks on the Choctaw land.
Yeah, the Native Americans.
Yes. Oh, this is where we also meet Frances McDormand.
At the beauty shop.
At the beauty shop. So she's a hairdresser. She doesn't have a first name. I don't think we ever learned. She's just Mrs. Pell.
Just Mrs. Pell.
She's the deputy. So Brad Dourif is her husband. And
what a lucky girl she is.
She doesn't seem too thrilled about it. I think later they're like, she says, you graduate from high school and marry the first boy that makes you laugh. Which, ladies, not a good strategy.
And by the way, if anybody's listening to this podcast and think Frances McDormand from like recent times, watch the movie.
Yes. So this is a very young Frances McDormand, but I think she's another person that you've probably seen in something. I always think of her first as she plays Mrs. Clavel in the movie Madeline. So it's like a series of children's books.
Oh, okay.
And she's like about like little girls at like an orphanage, and she's the nun that is like in charge of them. Which I loved growing up. I think iconically, she's married to one of the Coen brothers. She's in Fargo.
That's where
she's the pregnant cop lady.
Yeah.
She was in 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. I think she won an Oscar for that. She won an Oscar for Nomadland. That's a good movie. She's the mom in Almost Famous. She's in Moonrise Kingdom. She was in Macbeth a couple years ago with Denzel Washington. She played Lady Macbeth. It's very good. She was in Burn After Reading. Lots of stuff. Seems like a very cool lady and great at acting. So
seems to be a very smart actor to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's there as a hairdresser. Anderson is going there to ask around.
Is it just
So,
me? Did you pick up? It almost seems too there's a little bit of a spark between the
yes.
two of them because when he first sees her and she sees him, you can it almost like, oh, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think as we see them together throughout the movie, that just sort of builds and builds. This is also the part where they push the white folks push Hollis out of the car,
yeah,
right there in the town square. And Anderson tells Ward, "This is why I told you not to go." He said, "You can't talk to a colored kid with an audience,"
right,
is what he says.
yeah,
And Ward sat down in the quote unquote colored section in front of everybody, and everybody was looking.
yep. Oh
So like
yeah,
you can't do that.
it was like an E.F. Hutton commercial. You know, if for those of you who don't remember, when E.F. Hutton talks and everybody stops to, everybody listens. So
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, everybody was like watching them. So, and poor
Yeah.
Hollis had to pay the penalty.
Yes, and they realize this is a message for them from Mr. Clayton Townley
Mm,
and the local chapter of the Klan.
mm,
So but they go see where the car was found. And it's like in a swamp. They are waiting. They're all it's a little bit funny cuz the Choctaw guy leads them and he just starts walking into the wades into the water in his clothes. And they're all in their suits just wading through this water.
and in their dress shoes. That was
Yeah.
the other thing. It was like, because because men back then wore dress shoes. Yeah, so it's just like, yeah, they're just okay.
They just like are like waist deep in some like
In the
Mississippi
swamp.
swamp water. They tow the car out. They recover some stuff like
Keys, a
keys,
watch, I
a
think.
watch. Yeah, it was just like a couple of things, like a
Yeah,
drinks, like a beer can.
yeah, a couple of soda cans or something.
Yeah, but no
Pop
bodies.
pop cans,
Yes, pop cans and a bottle, a beer bottle, I think.
beer bottle. Yeah,
No bodies though, so they got to search the swamp for bodies. And this is when Ward's like, we need a ton more men. We need hundreds to come. And Anderson is like, this will start a war. And Ward says it was a war before we even got here,
right.
which is true.
Yeah, it was just on a smaller scale.
Yes, it was like a simmer. It was a Cold War
Oh,
kind of. Yeah, it
yep.
was simmering. It reminds me of like this movie, and the world generally reminds me of every year on Martin Luther King Day. I always post on social media a letter from Birmingham jail because I think it's one of the obviously like Martin Luther King was like a very good like writer and orator, obviously, but I think it speaks a lot to like the over sanitized way that people talk about him because he talks about he's very disappointed with the white moderate. But one of the things he talks about, and he's disappointed with other clergy who want him to like stop kind of rabble rousing.
Mm,
And one of the things he talks about is like a negative peace and a positive peace. And like negative peace is kind of like we just kind of keep everything like the status quo, but like
right,
there is no justice. Positive peace is where it is peaceful, but there is justice. And
right,
so I think that like that's like what they're talking about to me. Like you are going to Anderson sees what they're doing as inflaming things, but like Ward is like things were inflamed already.
right.
It was just the status quo, and that
It-
doesn't mean that it was like okay.
right. You're right. There wasn't the violence, but things were still not right.
Right. It was
Yeah,
the negative piece, as
yeah,
Martin Luther King would
yeah,
say. So also, if
yeah.
you have not read the letter from Birmingham jail, I would encourage everyone to read it. It's not that long. You can find it online. It's very good, and
Or you
hopefully
can
will
wait
make you
till
think
Monday
about
and
things.
Lindsay will post it.
Yeah. If you follow me on Facebook, I will post it. We kind of get some sort of different scenes happening. So we got busloads of Navy reservemen coming down because I guess they're like, who likes water? The Navy. Have them wading around here in the swamp. And then we also see images of more homes and churches being blown up and set
Yeah.
on fire.
There's a lot during there's a montage. It almost seems like to me of the
Mm-hmm.
violence being, you know,
Exacerbated.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are black folks being like dragged out of bed, their homes and churches burned.
Or when they
Um,
come out of church,
yeah,
yeah, and
people are getting beaten. The So they are continuing their investigation. The sheriff has an alibi. And we learn later the sheriff was not directly involved because he's smart enough to not be there, but he knew about it. This part I also love. The one of the other agents, I think Agent Bird, um, who is played by Agent Bird is played by Kevin Dunn, who I think is another character actor that's in a bunch of
It-
things. I recognize him most easily. He was in the Transformers movie as he plays Shia LaBeouf's dad in the Transformers movies.
oh, okay.
That's what I like connected him to, but like if you look up Kevin Dunn, he's been in a million things.
Yeah.
He comes up to Ward and is like, "The hotel manager wants us out. What
Yeah.
should we do?" And Ward is like, "Buy it." And he's like, well, "How much can we spend? Whatever it takes."
Yeah.
Ward is like all in on this.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Like the FBI just like how much like what was their budget?
Well, you got to remember back, I could only, back in the 60s, probably Hoover was in power. Hoover could do no wrong. And I think
Mm,
he probably had something on everybody. So
yeah.
whatever he wanted, and again, we talked a little bit, this was during the time when Lyndon Johnson was president. The civil rights movement was a big plank in his platform.
Yeah.
So
So they were
probably,
using a lot of federal resources to enforce like Brown versus the Board, immigration, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, that kind of
right.
stuff. Although
So
Voting Rights Act wasn't signed yet. That was 65, but Civil
yeah,
Rights Act of
but
64.
this was coming, it was coming to
Yeah.
this was, one of those things that I'm sure, prompted that or pre dated that. But
Yeah. And a lot of like Martin Luther King also like petitioned
yeah,
LBJ to use federal resources to support. If you've seen the movie Selma, for example,
right. So
you see that. So we get also like as these searches are unfolding, that also brings the media too. So and locals are being interviewed by the media, and this is how we get more of a flavor of kind of the pulse of the town, of the white folks in the town. They're only interviewing white people, but
exactly.
there
Yeah.
are people who say that they think it's a hoax. Some people say they think those boys deserved it for what they were doing. We see some people later. There's one guy later who's like the biggest redneck looking man. He's in overalls sitting in front of a like a pen, like an animal pen on a
Yeah.
farm. And he's like, "I don't think we're that different. Everybody's just people." And I was like, "This
Yeah.
man gets it."
Exactly. And he's probably one of the older people that they talk to, or that you see in the movie. So
Yeah,
it's not like
he's a person. If you saw him, you would not necessarily think him
e-
to be the most progressive of the
exactly.
bunch.
Yeah, he might not have that opinion, but
Yeah,
evidently
but he
he does.
does. He's
Yeah.
like, and he says, because they asked too, like, how are black folks treated in this town? And he was like, not very good, you
Yeah.
know? But
I
there's
think
a
they're
lady said,
treated terrible.
yeah, there was a lady who said, I think it's just fine. They get
Mhm.
treated just fine. And they're different from us. They don't wash, they stink. Da, 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 da. It's like, well, actually, probably it's you that stinks, but
Probably.
um I mean, I'm just saying the Europeans had to be taught how to bathe by the rest of the world. So, but yeah, so you get these little interviews interspersed with this stuff to see kind of the pulse of the town, and primarily pretty racist, except for the one guy. Shout out to that guy.
Yeah.
There's always one, at least one, hopefully more. And Frances McDormand says there are people here who know that this is wrong.
Right.
She says that later in the movie, but yeah, so they're also the media also interviews like the sheriff and the deputy, and we get some very colorful language from them. The sheriff, for example, says that the issue is the NAACP, and he says that that stands for the N stands for N words, alligators, apes, coons, and possums. And then he's saying all the like SNCC and all the other ones, and he said, "You know what I think it is? BULLSHIT." We then
Careful, your southern roots are showing through.
I know. The Kentucky is jumping out.
I was getting ready to say, yeah, your Appalachia's coming out of you there.
We then see a group of black folks who are worshiping at the burned down church, and they as soon as they see Anderson and Ward come up, they are like
Out,
out of there
out. Goodbye.
because people are scared that it'll talk because to talk because it'll get back to the law. And that's Vertus Williams, who is kind of the, I guess, the pastor. He's the leader of this congregation. He's played by the actor Lou Walker. He's in Remember the Titans. He's one of the older black folks that kind of recruits Denzel Washington, and he's also in My Cousin Vinny. He's the guy from the diner at My Cousin Vinny who serves him. His young grandson Aaron is played by, immediately I was like, that's Eddie Winslow. He's played by the actor Darius McCrary, who was Eddie Winslow on Family Matters. He's little in this though.
Yeah.
But the boy is like, you need to talk to the sheriff's office. He's like bold. He's like the only person that'll talk to them.
Well, and he's sort of leading the service a little bit. He talks
Mm-hmm.
about, there'll come a time when we won't have to say Sheriff Stuckey or Mr. Stuckey. We can just say Stuckey or Sheriff. It's
Yeah.
like, but that's not the time. But yeah, he's sort of, yeah, he's bold and he's not afraid to speak his mind. So
Yeah. And it's interesting too because Ward says to him, "Why aren't you afraid?" And he says, "Why aren't you?"
yeah, and Ward likes that in him because he smiles at him. He
Hmm.
thinks, oh, okay, this kid, yeah,
He gets it.
he gets it.
So they go to the deputy's house next because the sheriff has an alibi, but the deputy has, there's some time that his only alibi, he's like, I was with my wife.
Yeah,
He doesn't really have a hard alibi. So they go there to talk to him. So Ward questions him in one room, and Anderson finds himself in the kitchen with old Mrs. Pell again. They're the vibe is there. The vibe is there still.
as you can see, she kind of lights up when he's around her, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
And then he sort of treads on, he treads softly with her.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, because also it's like on one hand, like they want the information from her, but it's also like it's dangerous for her.
Sure.
But also he just like likes her. So it's
Yeah.
like
So there's a
a
lot
lot,
going on.
there's it's a very complicated dynamic. But they leave, and Ward is like, this dude's full of shit.
Yeah.
He's the BS detector is going off. And Anderson noticed in their wedding picture, all of his like groomsmen are doing a KKK sign. Basically, they have the
Yeah,
three
with the
fingers out,
three fingers out.
which
Yeah.
like Ward is like, what the hell does that mean? He's like KKK.
Yeah.
Anderson again, he goes back by himself to talk to Mrs. Pell by herself. He brings her flowers.
That he steals out of somebody's yard.
Yes, he has picked these flowers. um,
He doesn't buy the flowers. I thought that was funny.
it's also very funny because he always repeats himself because he saw those flowers when they were talking to the black folks because that's how he sort of like eased his way in to talking. He didn't immediately go in and be like, "Tell me about this." He was like, "Oh, what are these flowers called? They're really
Uh-huh.
pretty." He's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, they don't smell very nice, but they're very pretty to look at," which is what he tells her when he hands her a
Right.
bouquet. He's like, "Hey, these flowers smell bad, but aren't they pretty?"
Aren't they pretty to look at? And then she asks him what kind of flowers are they, and he tells her. So
Yes, yes. So he's passing the knowledge along. He's asking her about the timeline and the deputy's alibi. He looks at the wedding pictures again. She's like, "Oh, don't look at that. That's not a good picture." But they're very close
oh yeah,
physically.
yeah.
They are right up on each other. So again, the vibe is building. And then once again, Ward and Anderson have caused some not great consequences for the people they talk to. So that congregation that they were just talking to, they meet in a intact church, and the Klan is waiting for them outside when they go out, and they all beating people with sticks and poles, and the boy Aaron is just he's just sitting there praying, and then they come up to him and kick him in the face and the stomach and say that they'll kill him if he talks to the FBI again. And then we get more of the feds and the Navy looking for the bodies in the swamp. The locals are taunting them while this is
Yeah.
happening. And this is when we see more of the interviews where they say, "Oh, black people are treated fairly here.
Right. Yeah.
Martin Luther King is a communist," etc. Back to Frances, Mrs. Pell. we see that she is actually not racist. So there's a black lady who does their laundry and she comes over with her, I think it's her grandbaby. Frances McDormand is just like cooing over this baby. And then Brad Dourif comes out and the woman immediately is like, I'm getting out of here.
Yeah.
Um, and just like his presence is so like threatening. And obviously it is for the character, but it's like that's the vibe that I got. Just like the way that he stepped out there and like looked, because he didn't say
Yeah.
anything. He wasn't unpleasant to her, but
No.
the there's like a menacing, you know? There's just like a
Well,
not good.
that you got to figure she probably knows,
Mhm.
who he belongs to, and what he
Mhm.
does, and besides being the deputy. So,
Exactly, exactly. So she takes the baby and just skedaddles. And then Brad Dourif says something like, ironic, isn't it? Their babies are so cute. And it's like he's talking about a different species.
yeah. And even Francis looks at him like, what the hell are you, why would
Hmm.
you even say something like that? So,
Yeah, yeah. So we're getting some flavor. We also get to see Clayton, uh the old grand wizard, Clayton Townley, get interviewed by the news. And he's like, I'm not. They're like, are you in the clan? And he will not say if he's in the clan. But then he's like, let me say the most anti-Semitic, racist thing you've ever heard. Because he said, we don't like Jews because they killed Jesus and control all of the media. We don't like papists because they worship somebody in Rome, a king in Rome or something.
yeah, yeah.
We don't like Mongols and
Uh,
whatever,
gypsies
Indians, gypsies and Asians and Indians and blacks and stuff because we believe in Anglo-Saxon values or
purity or whatever.
yes. So
Yeah.
it's like I'm not in the I'm not going to tell you if I'm in the clan, but like wink wink.
Yeah. Let me tell you what I believe in. So,
Yes.
which
You heard
might
of
be
an
the
old
same.
guy named Hitler? Uh,
Yeah.
everything he believed, same.
Yeah. Double
Yeah.
goes double for me.
This is when, oh, this is a good scene. So this is when Anderson goes to the social club. He goes into the social club that is very much just like it's the daytime clan.
Right.
They do not want him in there. And he's like, "Oh, well, but I'm from Mississippi." And they're like, "I don't give a shit. Get out." So he sits down with Frank Bailey. It's
Yeah.
him and Deputy Pell are there and he's talking to him. Frank Bailey is played by Michael Rooker, who, if you are like me, you will most recognize as Yondu from Guardians of the Galaxy. He's the blue guy with the mohawk and the he whistles for the arrow. He's like
Yeah.
Quill's adoptive dad.
Yeah.
That's this guy. He's awful at this. I mean, he's good at acting, but he's the character is truly evil
And
in
again,
this
he's
movie.
very young in this.
Yes. But I was like, I know that guy. Let me
Yeah.
imagine him blue. Oh, I know him. Um,
Well, he sort of has like the same flat top haircut,
yeah, and you
except for
can
the,
tell just about the way he talks and like his
oh,
teeth
yeah.
are like not quite there. But he basically is saying that he would easily kill a black person with no remorse.
Right.
He would give it as much thought as wringing a cat's neck, which also does not speak highly of his character.
Nope.
And he threatens Anderson.
He grabs him by his tie,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then Anderson grabs old Frank by something else.
A little
Some,
lower.
yeah, something a little more precious. Um, and he's like, "We're going nowhere." And while he still has a hold of Frank, he turns to Pell. He's like, "What about you and that gun? You use that to shoot people?" Um, cut to Ward is like, "Anderson, that is not by the book."
It's not a bureau policy.
Yes. But you know what? He got a little further than they had been. It's there's like a parade of I guess like is it like a fourth? I don't know what the parade is for.
Yeah, I wasn't sure either. I wasn't sure what that was all about.
I
Or
don't know.
was it a rally or a parade?
I don't know. They called it a parade because
Yo,
he when he
okay.
goes in the beauty shop, he says, "Oh, you're not at the parade," but there's a parade of or a march of the black folks in town. There are some white people marching with them, but it's mostly the black
Yeah.
folks in town
It's
marching and
it's a priest. There's
yes,
a priest, a white priest.
some clergy, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
They are being taunted with slurs by the white people lining the parade route, but the police are actually like guarding the parade route. I'm sure under threat. I'm sure only because the FBI is there.
That
Um,
and the people from the press are still there. Like,
yes,
yeah.
yes. So, Anderson goes back to the beauty shop, even though Ward has told him to stop going to the beauty shop. Um, he's talking to Mrs. Pell, and the deputy sees them in the window and is not thrilled about it.
No.
And then Anderson and Ward are doing a stakeout because they know that the deputy and the sheriff are involved in this. They're still trying to figure out the deputy's role. So they follow them. They are meeting at this little house, basically. They give, it appears they give money to a black guy.
I think they give him his wallet back, it looks
Oh,
like.
okay. They
Because
give
he
him like a bag of
bag
something.
his paper bag, and I think it's got his because he puts it in his pocket. I thought it was his wallet.
Okay. That makes
So
sense. That makes more sense because I was like, what are they paying him for? But I guess they told him, we have your wallet, meet us here, and we'll give it back to you.
yeah, at first I thought I know it's going to say I thought they were going to give him a sandwich or something, like in a paper
Yeah.
bag.
I was
Because
like, do they have like an informant or something? Like
I
what's
know
happening?
that's what I wondered.
But it
Yeah,
was like, oh no, this is just how they lure people because
right.
then there's a truck that roars to life and starts going after him. And they grab him and take him somewhere. And Ward and Anderson want to go after them to stop them from killing him, but they don't want to be seen by the sheriff and the deputy. So they're like waiting for them to go back inside so they can
Yeah,
peel away without being seen. They finally do. Then they get stuck behind a train because a train comes right after the truck goes. But then they are able to catch them, mostly because Anderson is like, pull off the road, go on this little side road through the woods.
yeah. He's like, we
He just
goes,
knows he's like, turn left.
yeah, just he says, just go up this way, and then
Yeah.
sure enough, there's the truck, and then the truck's empty, but then he says, go up this road a little bit, and then
Mhm.
that's when they find the the young man.
Yeah. It appears that I was unclear what they did to him, but
I think they sodomized him.
that's what I thought, that they
Yeah,
sexually assaulted him.
yeah, because that's what it appears. Because it looks like his pants are
His
down.
pants were partway down, yeah, and there was
Yeah,
like blood.
and
So,
he's crying and upset.
mhm.
So and then yeah, so that was my perception.
Yeah. So, that was really awful and gruesome. And it was like for like no reason.
Exactly. Yeah. Just to visit harm upon somebody.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think it's part of like the fear thing, right? Because you never know
Oh yeah.
when
Or
something's going to happen.
gonna happen to you like that. And that you have to, you know, take that.
Hmm. Hmm. And Ward wants him to press charges, but the family is like,
Nope.
no,
Nope.
absolutely not.
Not gonna say anything to anybody.
So they think ultimately that if the deputy, if they had arrested the civil rights workers, they released them to the Klan. So they kind of released them and called the Klan and were like, here you go.
Right.
The way that they sort of did that to that guy. Um, they questioned the deputy with a lawyer if he was in the Klan, and he says no. He denies it, even though they have evidence that he was the Grand Cyclops, which again is a rank I was unaware of in the Klan. But I will also admittedly say I don't have a ton of Klan knowledge, so I'm fine with that. I knew they're mythical creatures. They're I was like wizards and dragons. It's like Dungeons D&D. The more you know, people.
Exactly.
But he says he was not involved with the Klan. And then his Klan buddies, Frank, beat up a journalist. I wrote that that's very similar to people now. It's like, you know, like January 6th, they were threatening journalists and stuff.
Uh-huh.
The mayor is upset with the FBI for implying that the sheriff's office did crimes. And they're like, okay, well, we're not going anywhere. There is some good turns of phrase here. The mayor says to Anderson, "You're so far up my nose, I can feel your feet on my chin."
Yeah.
And I think Anderson says, "You're gonna have to feel my feet on your chin for a little bit longer." Uh, we get Anderson. He's watching the deputy's house, but he leaves after the wife gets in. So it's implied that he's not necessarily watching for an FBI reason. He's just looking out for her, to make
Oh
sure
yeah,
she's okay.
because once the deputy leaves, he takes off.
Yeah. He like sees her get in
Yeah,
and then he
and then
leaves.
leaves.
White guys bomb another black family home, and there was a little boy that saw that saw who did it. And
Because he was out getting eggs for his breakfast, evidently.
yes.
Because they were after oh, they threw the thing up on the porch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so Anderson recruits Aaron, so little Eddie Winslow, to help get info because they were like, he's very brave. Maybe he can talk to this other. He's a little boy. He can talk to this other little boy. And this part really like broke my heart because they want this little boy to identify the people who did this, but they know that if he's seen with them, he'll be killed. So they're driving around with him like a little boy, like he's like 8, with a box over his head with like a slit cut out for the eyes so that he can see out and identify the people who did this, but people can't tell who he is.
Right.
And he's just like so small. Like it looks like it was like something that a kid would make for fun for like a costume, but he's
Right.
doing it to like not be killed.
I know. It's like if you didn't know better, it'd be like, oh, this is my helmet. I'm a
Right.
knight.
It's like it looks like so fun and cute, but it's like awful.
Yeah, and then this was the way that they came up with to protect him,
And he's
from.
so small, like because Gene Hackman's sitting in the back with him, got kind of his arm around him, and he's just like so small.
Oh, I know. Can you imagine? But and then for him to have to do that,
Yeah. And then even worse, he does, right? He identifies who did it.
yep,
They are convicted. They are tried and convicted in the state court. And the judge says, it's not good to mess with a man's home. That's supposed
right.
to be his domain. So y'all shouldn't have done that.
Shouldn't have done that.
But these crimes were brought about by outsiders with low morality, to which I wrote WTF. So,
That was always my excuse.
yeah,
I was influenced by people with low morality.
exactly. It sounds like the plot of Animal House. Um,
Oh yeah, I
so
didn't think about that.
these guys each get 5 years in prison, all suspended, aka they do not get any punishment.
No time.
And the gallery cheers,
Yeah,
except for up on the balcony because it's still a segregated courtroom. It's like in To Kill a Mockingbird
exactly. I
when
was just
the
going to
black
say,
folks
yep.
have to sit up on the. That's exactly what it made me think of. So the black folks up on the balcony are not cheering, but all the white people down in the gallery are cheering. The violence just gets worse. It's
Oh
like a
gosh.
whole neighborhood is being destroyed, and the sheriff is trying to stop the FBI from investigating. Like they're physically blocking them from like entering the scene.
Yep. I mean,
And
fires are being set and
mm-hmm,
not looting, but cars are being destroyed.
mm-hmm.
And he
And
goes, oh, and they're not doing anything about it. They're just letting it happen.
yeah, they're just like blocking the road basically.
Yeah.
And sitting there. Aaron's family is next. So Aaron and his grandfather and his brothers and sisters, they are attacked next. And the grandfather, I was really rooting for him because he was loading up his shotgun. And
Yeah.
he told Aaron, he was like, you get your siblings and your grandma and y'all run out the back and just keep running.
Just keep running. Yeah.
And he's loading up his shotgun going out. And he goes out there and he doesn't see anybody. So he turns around real quick to try to open the gate to get the animals out. And when he's turned around, they cheap shot him.
Yep.
They hit him from behind. And then they uh lynch him. They string him
Yeah.
up to hang
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. And he's while he's still alive. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. They just,
hang him up there. And Aaron comes back and tries to rescue him, but it seems like it's a little bit too
he's
late.
too late. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah. And that part was like the most upsetting. I had to like take a minute after that part.
There's a couple of scenes in this. Yeah. Unfortunately, but to me,
Yeah.
it's part of the impact of the movie that,
Yeah.
you know,
Cuz I
to
mean
see,
it happened. Like
yeah,
the like the complete like lack of humanity to literally just string up another person, hang them from a tree
for
for
no other,
nothing.
for nothing, for no other reason than the color of their skin.
Yeah. And then there were people that would go like that was a recreational event,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
People would go
Uh-huh.
watch these
E-
things,
exactly.
have picnics,
Lynchings. Yeah.
make postcards.
Uh-huh.
It's yeah. That part was like, oh my God. That was hard. And then like, when the little boy trying to come like save his grandfather.
Oh God, and he was talking to him,
Mm-hmm.
like Grandpa, it'll be okay. Come on,
Yeah. Come
wake
on,
up.
Papa. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
it'll be all right.
That part was hard. And this is when Ward, I think, finally is like, this is because of us.
Yeah.
And
And
Anderson says it's because they brought a media circus. And he's like, we didn't bring the media. Like the situation is something of interest. So the media
right,
came.
right.
Yeah, I think that was really like that hit him. And I think this is ultimately a turning point where they are going to it's starting to turn the tide and we're going to move away from Ward's way to Anderson's way. There's a couple more events that finally get us there, but I think that is probably the start of Ward being like, okay, we can't do
Right.
this the way that we normally would.
Uh
Um
yeah, he finally comes around to that he knows that his way, the bureau policy procedure way isn't going to get the job done.
yeah. So the next scene they go to the Klan rally. It's a big rally. Um they're not like in Klan hoods, but it's a white people rally. It's a white power extravaganza and Clayton Townley is talking about how much he loves Mississippi and segregation and the
Their
Anglo-Saxon way of life
their way of life
and
and
purity and
but he's not a member of the Klan.
but he's not a member of the Klan. This is the FBI is there. I love this part. They're just walking around writing down everyone's license plates.
Wait, you know what it reminded me? The scene in the wedding scene from The Godfather, where the FBI was walking around taking down license plate numbers of all the people that were at the wedding of the
Hmm.
Godfather, his daughter.
Yeah,
It was
Connie.
like, yeah, so it was like, yeah, we're just going to write down all the license plates
Yeah,
because
I love it
we
too.
know.
They're not like being surreptitious. They're just like, anyways,
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
just writing them
So
all down. But
just writing them all down.
I also wrote that speech again, as we said, like obviously he is speaking in more stark terms, but not that different from stuff
Nope,
people say. To
nope.
like there are things that you can perhaps the day that this comes out, there will be some speeches being given that sound like that. I don't know.
Well, because he never comes out and says anything against. I won't say that he doesn't use any
He doesn't
derogatory
use any
remarks,
slurs, but he's
slurs,
saying like white
white,
Anglo-Saxon
sin,
values and culture and they're
And
trying to change our culture. Like that's the kind of language people use
yeah,
now.
well, and they showed a film reel of a real clan leader, in the
Hmm.
full robe, and he talked about it would destroy the segregation would destroy both, or the desegregation would destroy both races.
Mm.
It would lead to the erasing of both races. Where it was like,
Hmm.
oh, we're looking out for the everybody.
Mm.
Yeah, right. So
Yeah. Anderson goes to see Mrs. Pell again, and she is lamenting the ugliness and the racism that exists in their town and how they were taught to hate. And she remembers being taught, I think she says Genesis chapter 9 verse 22, which is when they say like Canaan is a slave or whatever.
right, or
um
you set him aside, or
yeah,
yeah,
I
whatever.
looked it up. I forget the exact language, but it's basically like you all have this land and Canaan will be your slave. And
Slave.
people I guess interpret that as like,
That's the Bible condoning slavery.
yeah.
Bible also said it
She
was okay to stone people to death too at some
Right,
points,
for
and
wearing like mixed textiles. So
yeah,
like anyways, the big revelation here is that she says that her husband, Deputy Pell, drove one of the cars on the night of the murders. And the next big thing is that they finally find the bodies. They were basically buried in like a pile of dirt to like make a dam.
yeah. Well, she
Uh
tells him, yeah, she tells Gene Hackman
yeah.
they're on so and so's place in the earthworks or something.
Yeah.
And
And the deputy and the other guys become aware that his wife told the FBI this information and they go to his house. And this was another scene that I was like, oh God, what's going to happen? Because there's a bunch of very menacing men kind of standing in the doorway and she's just sitting there. And then her husband beats her up like badly. He's
yeah,
throwing her around.
yeah.
I thought that, and we discussed this, it looked like they might visit sexual violence on her, which it does not appear that they do, but he
Or that they would
brutalizes
even
her.
kill her. Yeah,
Yeah. I thought that they were going to kill her,
yeah,
but they don't get there. And this is really where they're like, okay, because now Gene Hackman like is into her. So not only is this, these people are committing crimes, but now like this is a step too far.
right.
'Cause the FBI gets a call about this and they know Anderson's like out somewhere and they're like, go get him.
Yeah. And bring him to the hospital, but don't
Bring him
tell him
Yes.
why or what
Yeah.
for.
And they're kind of setting up, they're like guarding her at the hospital.
Yeah.
They're like, you're in the back, you're in the front, like,
Yep.
and he gets there and sees her like in the hospital bed and he's very
They've
upset.
done a number on her. I mean, she's unconscious for one, or she's out.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, he was like slamming her into like the lamp and like
oh
physically just
yeah,
like throwing her
it was a tough
around.
scene to watch.
Yeah. And he's pissed and he's like angry at Ward and they fight. And but eventually they come to the conclusion and they come to agreement that like we are now doing things Anderson's way.
Yeah. And I like he because he says my way, my people.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
that's the next thing is you see some other guys arrive
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
suits, in cars, and then they're all coming
Yes.
up to Gene, and like these are people he's called.
Yes. They're still agents, but they're his
Evidently,
boys.
yeah, they're his buddies. So,
Yes. That happens in the context of the funeral for the black civil rights
oh,
worker.
sorry, yeah, yeah.
Uh, so it's a really good eulogy. The guy who's giving the eulogy is the actor Frankie Faison, who he's been in a bunch of movies. Also, you might if you've seen Coming to America, he's the landlord. He's in White. He's the agent in charge of the Wayans brothers and White Chicks. Like he's another one of those people that's like
Oh, okay.
in
Now
everything.
that's where I remember him
Yeah.
from. Yeah,
Yes,
I still think that's a funny movie.
it's on the list. But he gives a really good eulogy, actually.
Yeah,
I'm going to read it.
go ahead.
So they want me to say, let us not forget that two white boys also died helping Negroes help themselves. They want me to say, we mourn with the mothers of these two white boys, but the state of Mississippi won't even allow these white boys to be buried in the same cemetery as this Negro boy. I say, I have no more love to give. I have only anger in my heart today, and I want you to be angry with me. That I am sick and I am tired, and I want you to be sick and tired with me. I am sick and tired of going to the funerals of black men who have been murdered by white men. And I am sick and tired of the people of this country who continue to allow these things to happen. What is an unalienable right if you are a Negro? What does it mean equal treatment under the law? What does it mean liberty and justice for all? Now I say to these people, look at the face of this young man, and you will see the face of a black man. But if you look at the bloodshed, it is red. It is like yours. It is just like yours. So
Yeah,
that
it was
is,
very powerful.
yeah, yeah. And then everybody is like walking in the street, and Ward is with them. And
Uh-huh.
then they all go to the gravesite, and that's when Anderson's boys meet him
Yeah.
at the gravesite. And they take their first step, which is to kidnap the mayor. He gets in the car and then he gets handcuffed and a bag put over his head. And when he opens his eyes, there's a black guy in front of him who is an agent. He's Agent Monk is his name. And he's basically telling the mayor's story of a black kid named
Homer Wilkes.
Homer Wilkes, no relation.
Not that I know of, but hey, maybe.
Who knows? Who basically was a black boy that was kidnapped by white guys and castrated with a razor blade. And as he is telling the mayor this story, he has a razor blade that he's warming up over a candle. And so they're like, basically, you need to tell me everything you know. And the mayor sings like a canary.
Well, I love how the agent goes, "Is there something you want to tell me?" And
Mm-hmm.
he's like nodding his head like like a bobblehead. He's like,
Yes,
because he
very
can't,
much so.
because he's got tape over his mouth. He
Mm-hmm.
can't talk yet. And then,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, but he spills all the details. It's who was involved, whose idea it was, all of it. Ward
who
is
pulled
like,
the trigger, who
yes.
drove what car.
But Ward's like, we can't use this in court. And Anderson's like, well, whatever. We'll get him.
Yeah,
It's interesting. They sort of trick the the guys into meeting up because all the Klan guys who did the murder, they all meet up at this place. It looks like the same place maybe where they had that black guy meet them,
it looks like
but
a
during the day.
church
Yeah, it looks like a church. And
inside.
yeah. And they're all like, I thought you called this. Why are we all meeting like in broad
Yeah,
daylight? We should not be
yeah,
together. And they're all like, I thought you called this meeting. I thought you called this meeting. My wife said you called me.
yeah.
So clearly the FBI is putting them on notice a little bit. We know. We see
Exactly.
you.
Yeah, yeah.
So
We
then
know
they
who
kind of
you are and
start,
what you did.
yes, they kind of start picking them up one by one. So Anderson and one of his agents, Agent Stokes, who is played by Tobin Bell, who you may recognize as Jigsaw from the Saw movies. He looks, he is younger, but he looks the same. His
That's
hair is still white.
and
um,
he's creepy looking.
he's creepy. That's why he's Jigsaw.
But
Yeah,
isn't he
guess what?
though?
Younger Tobin Bell, still creepy looking,
Still
just so you
creepy.
know.
Thank God he's got a badge. Because
Yes. Anyways, they go to Lester's job where he appears to be like a cobbler. He's like making shoes. They go pick him up and he won't say anything. And, Ward's in the front seat, Bird's driving. So he's just being ridden around. And they are just reading him the mayor's account. So they're
right.
like, this happened, and then this happened, and then you did this, and then
Yeah.
you did, and finally he starts speaking because they talk about how he didn't kill any of them, but he shot the black guy after he was already dead.
shot him in the butt, and
Because he
then
was complain he like kind of complained, but then he because he was the one that in that voiceover we hear, at least I got to shoot me the
shoot.
N-word.
Yeah, but yeah, and they're saying like, oh, your buddy's already talked, and
Yeah, they're like
they said
we
you did it,
and
you
then
killed him.
finally he's like, "Oh, well, I didn't do that. No, no, no." So they have his confession and then they drop him off in a black neighborhood. And it's the first time we see one of these guys kind of have the fear on their face.
Yeah,
Because all the black folks are just kind of, there's a lady sitting on her porch who kind of just like smiles a little bit.
smiles a little bit, like yeah, and because he takes off running to
Yeah.
get out of there.
He
So
does not look happy. And then next is the deputy. So Anderson, the deputy goes to the barbershop to get a shave, and Anderson takes over the shave. Ward is sitting there too, supervising. And he's telling him what they know he said, that as they're burying the bodies in this dirt, that Mississippi would be proud of them.
yeah, what they did today.
Mhm. And he starts to get a little aggressive with the shave. He,
Yeah. Oh,
goes a little deeper, nicks him.
for you younger folks, by the way, he's shaving him
He's
with what we call a cutthroat razor. It's a straight
yes.
razor, so there's
Yes.
no
So
protective guard. There's
he could
no
very easily just slit his throat.
exactly. All it is like a 4-inch razor blade, in a handle. So
Yes.
just
And
just
at that moment, Ward is like, "Let me step out because I don't want to know about any of this."
yeah.
And then things escalate, and Anderson is just beating the absolute crap out of Deputy Pell, sort of like he did to his wife. Almost
He's
like it's a
he's sort of bouncing him around the barber shop.
he like breaks a sink with his body.
Yeah, yeah, because he shoves his head
Oh yeah, he
in the
shoves his head in
sink.
the full sink. He's like drowning him a little bit.
Yeah.
Ward tries to go back in because he can. It's loud,
It's
but the other agents are like, "Nope,
nope.
you just
Yep.
let him do his thing."
Yeah, Anderson's
Um,
Anderson's guys are like, no, 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 no. You
yeah,
said you were going to let him go. Do it his way. So this is
yes.
his way.
And basically, he finishes and says, I'll cut your head clean off.
Yeah, make no mistake, deputy.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I
And
don't
he
care
just,
how it reads in the report.
yeah, exactly. He leaves him in the chair, just spinning around.
You
Just,
almost expect to see the cartoon thing where the little bird is like
yeah.
swirling above his head, where it's he's
He's
so
like,
dizzy,
yeah,
he's in
he is not at
shock.
a full level of consciousness, we'll say. Just spinning. Now they realize the clan realizes Lester talked. So his window gets shot out, and there's a burning cross on his lawn. Well, that's what you think,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and Lester's like he hits the bricks.
Yeah.
He
Also, he just tells his wife to take their baby. He's like, just go in the back room and lock the door, and he leaves.
jumps in the truck and
I was
drives.
like, you just left your wife and baby in
You didn't
there,
tell your wife to go get in the truck and drive away, and you'll be
right?
the yeah. I know what a
You didn't tell your
coward.
wife like you better turn the truck on. I'm gonna be out there in a minute. Like,
Don't you love his wife though when the window explodes? Lester, what the fuck is going on?
yes, yeah.
It's like Lester, what the hell?
What a loser. So he's driving away in his truck and they're pursuing him. So again,
Right.
we at this moment it's our
It's
understanding is it's a clan
it's
because
two
they have the
guys with
hoods
the
on.
hoods on. Yeah, two guys
Yeah.
with the hoods on.
Also, a lot of the hoods we see are not the like the
No, they're not the
full
fancy ones.
they're not the fancy ones. It's a pillowcase with like a
Holes in
pillowcase
it.
or like a sack with
Well,
uh
come on, look, not everybody can afford the official.
the fancy hoods, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly.
The
Yeah.
pointy ones.
With right, the point, and that's what Anderson calls them, the pointy
Hmm.
heads.
Hmm. Hmm.
The pointy heads.
So then they try to lynch him. The FBI arrives just in time as they're about to string up Lester,
Oh yeah, because they
and
got the
they
noose
save
around
him.
his
And
neck,
yeah, and they're chasing the guys into the field, and then they take
shooting at
Lester
them, and
away. And it was not the clan; it was some of Anderson's guys, and they were just trying to scare him.
But Anderson, I love when he goes, Lester, it's a good thing we had our eye on you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd have been strung up for sure by your buddies.
And presumably Lester has soiled his pants because they're like, Lester, you gotta go to the bathroom, man. Um, but everyone, they're able to go after all of them in federal court. So they go after them for civil rights violations and to
I think
supersede
was it kidnapping?
kidnapping. Yeah, but they do civil rights violations and
Right,
also like other federal level crimes so that they can supersede state courts.
state court.
Which is stuff you still see, right? Like when there are like, for example,
Yeah,
like Derek Chauvin who killed George Floyd, like he was convicted on state charges, but also he has federal
federal.
like civil rights charges against
Right.
him too. So that's a common practice still. Basically, all of them, except for the sheriff, is acquitted because the sheriff did enough to insulate himself.
Right.
But and you get the text on screen and see like a montage of them all being arrested. I really loved when they arrested Clayton Townley at his like, I guess he says he's a businessman. I
I
guess he's
think
like
it's a cotton mill, isn't it?
yeah. And you can see there's like a black guy working for him who looks pleased when he's
I
hauled
think they're
away.
all black guys working for
Yeah.
him, and they parade him in handcuffs,
Yeah. You
and
see the
yeah,
one guy with like the bandana on his head, like
yeah,
he's
like the
like,
yeah,
mm-hmm.
uh-huh.
But we get on screen how much they didn't get that much time.
No, I thought the
The
same
max
thing.
was through 10 years.
10
There's a
years.
range of it was like 3, 5, 7, 10, like
Because I don't think they
some
could get him
mix.
on murder.
Yeah.
I guess it was kidnapping or obstructing justice, maybe, or something.
Conspiracy, like civil rights violations,
Civil
stuff
rights
like that.
violation. But yeah,
The sheriff is the only one who gets acquitted because he obviously seemed to have insulated himself enough
yeah, he got
to not
nothing.
get in trouble. But the rest of them all got somewhere between 3 and 10 years, which
Ten
again is
years.
not enough. But the mayor hangs himself, and they talk about he was kind of guilty of he didn't do any of it, but he
But
knew all of it was happening. He was
right,
guilty of watching all of this happen. And I think,
guilty by association.
yeah, I think Ward maybe says like maybe we all are kind of.
He does, and you're exactly right. I was good at yeah, yeah, and he brought up a good point because like you said earlier in the movie, he realized that some of what had happened to the people in the town were precipitated by the FBI coming, to
Hmm.
there. So
Hmm.
maybe he's right that they wouldn't have found out the truth, but maybe some of those people probably wouldn't have died.
Yeah, yeah, because I think he had this idea of like, well, this is the way it should be, and it's like
Right.
great,
Yeah, but
it should
it's
agreed, but like it's just not the way it is. And so like,
not in Mississippi.
are you being helpful by acting like that isn't the way it is?
Right. By burying your head in the sand or being that naive to think that,
Yeah.
what
Naive and like,
floats in New York or Chicago or Detroit does not come down here.
right. And I think it's even naive in New York or Detroit or Chicago. It just
Oh
looks a little different, you know what I
yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anderson goes to see Mrs. Pell, his good old friend Mrs. Pell, at their house, it's just trashed.
Trashed. I mean, trashed. I mean, the doors off the hinges, the
Yeah,
windows are broken. The interior is just, it looks like a wrecking crew had been in there.
exactly. Exactly. And he's like, "What are you gonna do?" She doesn't know what she's gonna do. And he says, "Where are you gonna go?" And she's like, "I'm staying here. This is where I'm from." And there are enough people here who know what I did was right. And she's also still like her face is still
Well,
all
yeah, he said he just missed her at the hospital. So she
mhm.
just got out, I guess, that day.
And
So
she's still looking rough.
she's got like something on her, a cast on her hand or something. So,
Her face
and
is all
yeah, she still
messed up,
looks,
but she's
but,
like, she feels secure in the fact that what she did is right, and she says there's enough people in town who also know that what she did was right. So,
and there's enough people that like the way she does their hair.
yes, exactly, exactly. So,
A little bit of steel magnolias in there,
exactly.
you know?
And the last thing we see is the the black folks gather for church, and with some white people are there
Yeah.
in their burned out church, um, singing hymns together and having a church service.
Well, and then the parting shot, though, I don't know if you remember at the very end of it, they show it's the headstone of the
Oh
black
yes.
black civil rights worker where it's busted and
Yeah.
destroyed, except for the part that says is not forgotten,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which even at the end of it, it's somebody destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
his final monument or his resting place.
Yeah. But you can't like fully destroy
No, yeah, but
the idea.
right is not
Yeah.
forgotten.
Yeah. Because Ward and Anderson are stopping by. They're watching this happen
Yeah,
before they get back on the
get
road
back on the
to
road.
leave.
So
Um, but yeah, I mean it's a heavy,
it's not a
heavy
it.
movie. Honestly, it made me another movie that like came up as a suggestion that I haven't watched and I almost wanted to watch it was A Time to Kill because I was like, I want to see
Ooh,
some revenge here.
yeah, that's a
So I
good one
might actually
too.
watch that like in the next day or so.
Well, I was going to say,
Or
or if
watch
you
like Django Unchained.
Django Unchained, or if you want to, or just one where maybe we do see a little bit more positive action, like Selma, or
Yeah.
something along those lines,
Yeah.
if you or Malcolm X, although
Hmm.
that's a tough movie as
Yeah.
well, because of what happens to him eventually, but his fight, for
Hmm.
equal rights and so on and so forth. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
There's a lot of good movies. I would also recommend to Judas and the Black Messiah. It's
I
about
have not seen that, so
it's
I'm
about
not.
Fred Hampton
Oh,
being
okay.
killed. And what was interesting about Fred Hampton was that he actually was trying to link up with the poor white people.
Oh,
So there were like white militia. He was like in Chicago. There was like white
uh-huh.
militias, and he was like, "Y'all don't like the police either, right? The police are messing with you too. Let's work
Let's
together." So
let's
he
let's
was
work.
working together with like Latinos and
The
like
enemy of
black
my
folks.
enemy is my friend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
What's interesting too, as I was looking up the quote for
Eulogy.
the eulogy, I found the final quote that Anderson said when he was telling the story about his father.
Uh-huh.
And the last bit, he says the like, if you can't be better than an N-word, who can you be better than? And Ward is like, do you think that's an excuse? And Anderson's like, no, it's not an excuse. This is just a story about my daddy. And Ward says, where does that leave you? And Anderson says, my old man was just so full of hate that he didn't know that being poor was what was killing him. Which goes back to what I said before of like
Yeah,
where this started way back, like when there was slavery, like poor white people had so much more in common with enslaved people than they did with like rich
exactly.
landowners, but they couldn't let that happen.
Yeah.
So
They
they
had
had to
to.
be like, no, 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 you're with us. We are all white. We're
We're right.
better.
We're alike. We're
We are in the same team
y-
against them.
yeah.
No, 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 you're not on the team with them against us. But like, so that I think that's what like Fred Hampton was going for, right? Like the
Oh,
Rainbow
okay. Yeah.
Coalition, right? Like we are all in
Yeah.
solidarity against these people that are oppressing us
Against
because
the
we're all
yeah
being oppressed, right?
by the machine or
And then the
whatever you want to
FBI
call
was
it.
like, can't have that. FBI are not the good guys in Judas and the Black Messiah. Let me
Oh,
tell you that
okay.
one, because they had him killed. But yeah, this one it's heavy, but I think it's like important because, I think you can't get anywhere without sort of reckoning with what really exists. And I also think we're at a time that a lot more people don't really want to talk about these kind of things, right? Like
Yeah.
you're like erasing it from like curriculums and books and stuff like that.
Right.
And like because it makes people like look bad, but it's like
Or it makes people uncomfortable
yeah, but
but
like
yeah,
it happened.
it
If it's
happened.
uncomfortable for you to read about, imagine how uncomfortable it was to live through.
Exactly. So, and I realize, now, especially after you and I have talked about it, that this movie only tells one perspective or one point of view, but I still think it's an important point of view, maybe
Hmm.
to look
Hmm.
at, and then
Yeah.
not to downplay anybody else's reaction or views of it, or
Hmm.
whatever. But I just, when we talk about movies that like I said, made an impact on our lives. This one did for me because
Yeah.
while I read about it and I'd heard about it and I'd seen the news clips and stuff,
Hmm.
for me to see it depicted in this way, then at 30 some years of age, then it was, a lot different to me. It was, brought it really home. And then,
Hmm. Hmm.
so
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like we said, I think that I understand where the criticism is coming
sure.
from.
And I can appreciate that. So,
Exactly. And I also think that, like, I think it's just really about like knowing what this movie is about and like what the perspective is of it. And I think if you go in with that, then I think you can get a lot out of it. Because I think ultimately, too, like, when we're talking about racism, like, it is something that like white people have to reckon with.
sure.
Because like the people doing this stuff and, are like white people. So it is something I think, you know what I mean? Like that is
Yeah.
part of dismantling this whole thing, right? It can't just be like black people like resisting all the time. It is white people having to like sort of confront something within ourselves and the people
And,
around us.
and within our structure,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So
So
yeah,
I think that
it's
it's
not just
valuable
their
for
problem. It's not just, it's all of our problem.
exactly.
It's,
Just because it doesn't like affect you does it like, but also like we if we like created the problem, like, it's like
right,
we got it, we're the ones who got to fix it.
right,
um so yeah, I think that it's very valuable in that way to just consider like how these different power structures are dealing with the
right,
situation, and how even maybe someone like Ward, who maybe has the best of intentions and maybe has a better sense of like civil rights, also doesn't necessarily have the best understanding of the reality,
right,
the lived experience on the ground. Whereas Anderson maybe doesn't have the sort of like book knowledge, or the like, he maybe doesn't even like buy in quite as much to civil rights, but he has a better sense of like day-to-day life for these people and like they're coming from and like what
right.
it looks like
And
and how to
what the
like.
repercussions would be
Yes, yes.
from actions
Hmm.
taken, or how the actions are taken. Yeah.
Yeah, and how to sort of like, it shows that the system is set up in a way to maintain this. And so I think Ward is trying to work within the system, and Anderson is like, no, 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 we
You
have
gotta,
to go around it
yeah,
because this system is set up to keep this things the way they are.
you
So
gotta break the system.
we
Yeah.
gotta like knock it down, go around it. We can't try to use these channels because they're just not set up for this.
Right. Well, he really used their own, like you said, he used their own tactics against them.
Hmm.
The fear and the unknown and then, the
Intimidation and
intimidation.
like.
Right, exactly. And then, the threat, that
Hmm.
it's the
They were living under that thing of like, when is something going to happen to us? When
right.
are they going to come for us?
Yeah.
That they created for the black people in their community. So, but that was the only way to like get them to
Oh
fess
yeah.
up.
So I did like when there seemed to be a sort of when they did at the final part of it where they arrested them, the difference between the looks on their faces when they arrested them and when they came out of the courthouse after being convicted, it was like
Hmm.
they were kind of smug. At the big, when they were arrested, it's like, oh, I'm going to go free. I'm going to walk, and then, like you said, 3, 7, 10 years is not, for what they did is not nearly enough. But the fact that they were convicted, I think, you could see on some of their faces, it was like, you can't do this to me, or
Hmm.
that didn't just happen.
Yeah. Except the sheriff still looked smug, but
Oh well, because he
because he
got
got
off. Yeah,
acquitted.
exactly. So,
Um, but
but
what can you
anyway,
do?
I know. So, well, I appreciate you watching the movie. I know it wasn't an easy movie to watch.
No,
So
but I think it was a good one. I think it was a good one. And
good.
like I said, now maybe I'll go watch A Time to Kill so I can see Samuel L. Jackson
Open up
get
with an
some.
AR-15.
Exactly. I thought you were going to say open up a can of whoop ass. um,
Even
Figuratively,
better.
yes.
Even better. So yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so maybe. But yeah, I think that it is impactful, and I think that the thing that does stick with me is just how some of the language, like I said, not to be too repetitive, like it feels similar to things people say now.
Sure.
And I think people are maybe becoming increasingly bold about saying some of these things these days.
They do say history repeats itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's hope not. Let's hope not. Maybe
Let's hope
maybe
not.
we can try to do more than hope if we try to be a little more proactive. And
Mm-hmm.
if we do see history trying to repeat itself, maybe there's, what's the old axiom? The thing for evil to succeed is for good men to do nothing.
Mm-hmm. 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 And as
Or good
Martin
people, I
Luther,
should say.
yes,
Not just, sorry. That was the old quote is good men.
it's
So
all good. They all say that. But
no
as
offense,
Martin
no
Luther King
offense, man.
said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I would also argue that I think it doesn't bend by itself. We got to bend it.
Good point.
So, and maybe you bend it like Ward, or maybe you bend it like Anderson, but it's got to be bent. But
Got to be bent. And
yes,
maybe if enough of us pull on it hard enough, we can bend it the right way quickly enough.
exactly, exactly.
Good
So
point.
I try. So, um, well, anything else you want to add?
No, I hope that people, if they do decide to watch it, that they take into account, when it was made and when it was represented,
Mm-hmm.
and then just and hopefully listen to our podcast and then understand our viewpoint. And you brought out very good points about, the differences in how the movie was perceived by different people and so on. But just look at it and make your own determination. But again,
Yeah.
I still think it's an impactful movie, and a movie that, that, like I said, to me made a big statement, and hopefully it will to other people if they don't know a lot about that time of our history.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just say, I think obviously one of the criticisms too is that the FBI are like the good guys, and we know that like the FBI was like listening to Martin Luther King's phone conversations and like possibly encouraging him to kill himself, and like,
Oh yeah, they were not a lover of Martin Luther
not
King by any stretch, or
super
at least.
supportive of him, but also we know that like as you mentioned with Lyndon Johnson, and like in even back to Eisenhower, right in the aftermath of like Brown versus the board, because as you see in this movie, state governments were still, especially in the South, still very hostile to any sort of desegregation. The federal government did had to step in a lot
Uh-huh.
um, to enforce these things. So I think that is kind of what we're getting at here in this movie, is like the way that the federal government had to be used to kind of like step over these state governments that were actively continuing segregation, letting people off for racist violence, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
So I don't think you have to think of the FBI and like J. Edgar Hoover as like a friend of the civil rights movement, because
No,
obviously he was not. But I
no.
think that it's just obviously like every FBI agent is different, and you get a sense of that in this movie. But I think the point is just that like the federal government had to step in this time because states were just refusing to abide by civil rights laws
Right.
at the
By the
time.
law,
So,
by the law of the land. Yeah.
yeah,
So, it
yeah,
wasn't just states' rights. It was the national mandate. So,
yeah, yeah. And I think when people say states' rights, when people talk about states' rights with the Civil War, they're talking about states' rights to have slavery. And so I think often when people talk about states' rights, they're not like states' rights to do good things. It's states' rights to do bad stuff and tell the federal government to just let them. So, um, this is a case where the federal government, there was a period of time, in the Supreme Court, in the presidency, in Congress, that the federal government was like, actually, we're not going to let you.
right,
Um,
decide what the best course of action to take is.
because your decisions are bad and racist. So that I will just add as a caveat. So like, again, like we said, the you can see where the criticism comes from, but also I think if you know what that criticism is, I think it doesn't hurt to like look at it.
Sure. Oh yeah. No,
To see what the issues were, but I think if you can go into it with like understanding what the perspective of the movie is, then I think you can, you know, you won't be like disappointed by
yeah.
that.
that's that's a good point.
Yeah,
So
I think
yeah,
if
you
you
said
go
it. You
in
said it.
thinking this is specifically the story of these three civil rights activists, you will be disappointed. But I think if you understand that it's about the way that the federal government was trying to interact with these smaller governments to address some of this stuff, I think then you can get a lot more out of it. Because that's
Agreed.
like, you want to judge it for what it's actually trying to do and not for kind of a misunderstanding of what it's trying to do, I guess.
Right. Or wanting it to be something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think we don't, if you want it to be something it's not, then you will definitely be disappointed. But I think if you come into it understanding like this is what it is, then I think it can be really, really impactful in that way.
Good point. Thank you. So
Well, thank you all for listening. Please subscribe wherever you're listening to this so that you can get all of our episodes. They come out every Monday. You can rate, review, leave a comment. Hopefully, it's a nice one, or else we're going to call Anderson's guys to give you a talking to. Please follow us on Instagram at Some of Our Parts Pod. You can see all the other movies we've talked about. There is quite a diverse array, especially if you need something silly or funny to watch, if you want something scary, if you want something holiday themed, whatever. There's lots of different options. You can also get little previews of what's coming and whatever else we decide to post there. And with that, bye bye.
take care.